My tumors are empty. Now, that may seem like a weird comment to make, so let me explain it. But before we get into that, let me explain why I'm dressed like an old lady. In fact, I feel like I'm dressed like that old lady from Tweety Bird, you know, the one who's like always sitting in a rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, falling asleep while stuff happens to Tweety Bird. That's kind of what I feel like. I don't know, the cover just reminds me of that for some reason. Okay, so let's get into it. The reason why I said that my tumors are empty is, in one of my recent videos, I discussed how a former friend of mine a long time ago did something bad. And he told me about it, and I just, reacted poorly. I should have reported him. I did not. I waited way too long and only recently finally reported him. And even though it's like I did what was right finally, it didn't really change anything. It didn't really like lift a weight off my shoulders. It, it just felt like, well, I just did what I had to do and that was it. So what I did was reach out to a friend of mine. He's very good at working with people, also with himself, and just helping them process some, difficult things like this, where there's a lot of guilt and shame involved and things like that, and be able to release it so you're able to then move on. So I knew he'd be able to help me with this, but, because of the, sensitive nature of the topic, I was very clear with him like, hey, this is going to be intense. So if you prefer not to get into it, I completely understand that. I respect that. I want to give you the option to kind of, bow out now if you don't feel comfortable with this. Luckily for me, he's been through a lot himself. He's been exposed to people who have been through a lot, and he's able to, make the difference between, you know, what's his and what's not his, and not take on other people's stuff. So he was like, no, don't worry, I'll be there. Like, I'll do what I need to. We'll work through this process and help you let go of this once and for all. So we went through it was almost like a 2 hour process. And it was just on the phone. And, I was just lying in bed in the dark with the phone on my chest, just talking to him. He walked me through everything, and we kind of went through this process. First step is, I just explained everything to him in detail, what happened, what my former friend did, how I reacted poorly to it, and, everything. And then once I was done, he asked a couple questions, and then we really began the process. And I don't need to go into too much detail when it comes to the process because, well, first of all, it's his process that he created to help people go through that. So it's not my place to really share that because, it's kind of like a coach. If he develops his own process to help people, well, it feels weird for me to share that. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but the detail itself doesn't really matter. It's really, we went through this process of just kind of identifying in my body where this, this guilt and this shame and this stress related to me not saying anything lived, and then being able to release that and then kind of go in and remove all the things associated with that, such as, fear or guilt or shame or any of those things like that. And even though he has this process and he walked me through it, I'm always kind of very intuitive and I can sense what's best for me. And I'm also a very creative, imaginative person, and visualizing things helps me. So when it was time to really kind of go through that process of, all right, let's go through this one at a time. So let's say like fear, it's like, all right, where does the fear live, like inside me physically? Because there's always a physical representation of what's going on emotionally in your body. And the process that made the most sense to me as I started going through it was like, let's kind of like collect all that. And it's basically like I pictured it as like crap, literal like shit. Um, and it's like, okay, those when you have a cat and there's a litter box, and you have to, remove the crap from the litter box after a while, and you have those little like shovels with the holes in them, so you like, pick up the poop and then shake it, and well, it's not really sand, but whatever that thing is, like just, falls out, and then you can throw away the poop. Um, it's kind of like that visual that I had in mind. It was actually more like a rake, and I'm just like kind of like raking through sand, collecting the little pieces of poop scattered throughout my body. But not just, my body, it's also like, through the past, because it's been a long time. And I want to collect all that, in this case, fear, let's say. Uh, and then also for the future, because it's like, it's not something that I want to keep thinking about and spending a lot of energy on. But, I might mention it every once in a while, maybe to a few close friends just to kind of explain the situation. I don't know, whatever. But it's like, maybe there will be some fear or shame or whatever, associated with that in the future. So let me collect that as well. So I just had this visual of, raking through sand and collecting all these little like pieces of crap and kind of combining them into a ball. So I'm basically collecting crap and packing it into this crap ball. And that was the visual I had. And it's like, the stress, like the stress, the tension, like the place that I felt it the most in my body was really like dead center chest. And there was just like this tightness, and like as I went through the process, I realized like pretty much everything, or at least most of it, related to cancer that I've been going through, over the last 18 months, and even before that, it started to form, feels like it's related to this specific thing, to what my former friend did, and, me not saying anything because I was afraid, because I felt indebted to him because of, our past together and stuff like that. So I feel like, okay, there was this secret that I kept that I was really ashamed of, even though it's not something I did. I still chose to keep it, and I was ashamed of that, embarrassed. I was afraid of what would happen if I said something, and it just kind of like lived inside me. I adopted that secret, even though it wasn't really mine, and I just kept it. And I buried it down deep and tried to ignore it and pretend like it wasn't there. But of course, you can never really ignore something like that. So it manifested itself physically in the form of that tumor that developed in my leg, which is the initial source of the cancer. And then eventually, it spread to the lungs, and then multiplicated there, and then eventually traveled to the brain, and there was a few tumors there. And it just feels like everything was related to that, of like me trying to maintain control, trying to hide that secret, even though it's not really mine. I still chose to take it on as mine. And as a result of that, my body just got sick. It's like you're taking this like sickness, if you will, and you take it and put it in your body and try to just keep it there. It's like, yeah, of course it's going to affect you. It's going to physically make you ill. And I believe that is the main reason why I developed cancer, and why I still have cancer, even though I've gone through all these different processes and shifts in perspective and everything to try to, let this go, to try to get rid of it. And it just hasn't worked. Well, it's because I was still hanging on to that. It was still inside me, still affecting me. And going through this process with my friend yesterday, just to clarify, the different friend, the friend who's like, a coach and helping me work through this process, not the former friend who did this thing. Anyway, going through that process and collecting all that, energetical crap from within me and collecting that into that ball, it got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm not just collecting the crap. It's like this crap is becoming kind of like a magnet. And it's literally like starting to attract magnetically the tumors, which were a result of me keeping that secret for so long. And it's kind of like ripping them out of me and collecting them in that ball. So it's like, the best way that I can describe it is like, those like flat mushrooms that grow on trees and grow in like bunches, and you can kind of like, scrape them off or pick them off one by one. It kind of feels like that's what the tumors were, especially in my lungs, like because there's just so many of them, and they're all like on the inside of my lungs. Like it kind of felt like that, like just like a bunch of mushrooms on a tree trunk, and it's like I'm passing this magnet over, and it's just kind of like ripping them out. That's kind of what it felt like. And I just like this analogy because I've always hated mushrooms. So it's like, oh, cool, I'm getting rid of mushrooms. I hate mushrooms. They're crappy. They suck. So basically, like, I had this ball of, like, energetical crap that I was collecting from inside me to get rid of it. And that turned into a magnet that attracted the mushroom tumors, for lack of a better term, and collected them within that ball and extracted them from my body. And, it was a slow, gradual process. As I mentioned, like, from the start to the end, it took about 2 hours. But by the end of it, I'd collected like this big, imaginary, of course, but energetical mass of just like crap of like all the emotion attached to the secret that I kept, as well as all these, mushroom tumors that I just like ripped out of, my lungs and my brain. And there was just this one big one left, like the one from my leg. It felt like that was just like one giant mushroom on that, metaphorical tree. And it's like the magnet is kind of like pulling it away, weakening it, but it's still kind of slightly attached. So at the end, once I got rid of, everything, all the crap, collected everything, all the mushroom tumors and everything in that big ball, what I did is I pictured myself like taking that and breaking it apart into like basically like a snowball, but a ball of crap and mushroom tumors instead, and throwing it as hard as I could at that bigger tumor that was left, the one from my leg, until eventually it fell off. And then it's just a question of like, I'm just picturing myself like, just like stomping it and the crap and the other tumors and everything, and just like stomping it and stomping it and stomping it until there's basically nothing left. And going through that process feels like it completely liberated all the energetical, how do I say this? Basically, it felt like I got rid of all the tumors on an energetic level. And that's what I mean by my tumors are empty. It's like, yes, physically they're still there. It's going to take a while, weeks, months, potentially even years before they completely go away, before my body's able to get rid of them. But it's basically like whatever energy they had, whatever sickness they contained, that was extracted. So all that remains is that physical tumor. And it has nothing left to grow anymore. So all that can happen is just slowly going to rot away, slowly going to die and, deteriorate and fall off and eventually just completely be gone. So it's like, even though they're still there physically, it feels like all their power was ripped away, was taken away through that process that I just described. And I feel completely like free of it. It's a strange but wonderful feeling. It kind of reminds me of, at the start of the year when I had that shift in perspective and I just felt like completely at peace, like all the pressure and everything has been released, had been lifted from my shoulders, and I'm just like happy and I'm grateful for everything and I'm at peace and everything is perfect. It's kind of similar to that. And so yeah, it feels like I've gotten rid of like all the energetic, mushroom tumors, for lack of a better term. And all that remains is just the physical ones, and then it's just a question of time for my body to just slowly get rid of those. So it's like, I know there's still going to be symptoms for a while, such as coughing and breathing issues, and, same as usual. But at this point, I feel like, all right, I've finally gotten rid of what I needed to get rid of, and now the healing process can begin. With one small caveat. This entire process I described pretty much got rid of every single tumor except one. In my brain, there was 3 tumors. There was 2 bigger ones and 1 smaller one. And, they did radiotherapy a while back and they've been slowly shrinking ever since. But on the last scan, the two biggest ones continued to shrink as expected, but the smaller one, the tiny one, grew just a tiny bit. And I just sense like this tiny tumor that grew a bit is unrelated. It's not related to the secret that I kept. It's not related to that. It's something different. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but at this point, it's like, there's hundreds and hundreds of tumors in my lung, a couple in my head, massive one in my thighs. It's like, I took care of those. In comparison, one tiny one, it's not really a big deal. I'll figure out what it is eventually, and I'll do whatever I need to get rid of that. It's like such a tiny thing in comparison. It's like, 99.9% of the issue has been removed. There's like 0.1% left. Not that big a deal. So it's not 100% over, but it just feels like, okay, the healing process can finally begin. The tumors have been, emptied of their power, their negative influence on my body. And it's just a matter of time now before things get better, before they shrink, before they disappear completely. So that's what I meant by my tumors are empty. And it was a very cool process to go through. It felt very good. Like in the process, not necessarily always fun, but once it was over, I felt really good. Had a very good night's sleep last night. I've been breathing better ever since. Coughing, maybe a little less. Not really, haven't noticed that much on that front, but really the breathing, like huge difference on that front, which is very surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that. And it feels good. And the other thing that surprised me is because we did this in the morning yesterday. And in the evening, because I've been thinking about this thing, it's been on my mind for the last 3-4 days, and it's been the main thing I've been thinking about. I tried to think about it yesterday evening, and it took a couple seconds for me to be able to really focus in on it and remember what it was exactly that I was keeping secret, that I was ashamed of all these years. And it's like the details were kind of fuzzy. So it's almost like going through that process of just getting rid of all that emotional baggage and all the negative stuff related to that. It kind of almost erased my memory in a way. Not really, not completely. But it's at this point, it's just yeah, okay, it's still a thing that happened. It's still something that exists, but it's not mine anymore. There's no longer that attachment, that guilt that I felt for so long. And it's just I'm completely free of that. And it feels really, really good because at this point, I don't know exactly how long it's been. It's not I marked it in my calendar well, today is the day that I started keeping this horrible secret. So I don't know exactly how long it is, but probably around 8 years, something like that. So a very long time. And now that it's finally gone completely, it just feels really amazing. And the other thing that I found ironic is yesterday happened to be Friday the 13th. Now, I'm not the type of person who necessarily worries about stuff like that, but I just thought it was ironic. And it's oh, well, it's Friday the 13th. Guess that turns out that it was bad luck for my tumors because they're empty and they're going to die now. So, sorry, but not sorry. So anyway, it was really a really, really, really cool process that I went through. And I know saying really that many times is not very original, but who cares? Thank you for watching. Hopefully this wasn't too long. I'm realizing we're coming up on the 20-minute mark, but I felt it was very important to just share this experience, to go through the process, because this really felt like a significant shift, and it truly feels like the beginning of the healing process. And I'm just really optimistic about the future, looking forward to, in a couple months when they do more scans, what the results of those will be, how things will go, if the symptoms start to, slowly fade and go away. I don't know what to expect, but I'm just really optimistic about the future. So thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the future. I missed the button. Ooh, it's been a while since I did that.